Hi, I'm Mr. Watson, and in this video we're going to be looking at the plot of William Shakespeare's famous tragedy, Romeo and Juliet. To begin with, let's meet the characters. So there are two rival families in this story, the Montagues and the Capulets. The Montagues are headed by Lord Montague, who is married to Lady Montague. Both hate the Capulets with a fierce passion. They have a young son called Romeo, who is romantic, passionate, and emotionally sensitive. Romeo's cousin and best friend is called Benvolio, who has quite a peaceful nature and would often try to avoid fighting. Another of Romeo's friends is Mercutio, a character who's a bit of a joker and one who doesn't take himself too seriously. Also on the Montague side is Friar Lawrence, a priest who acts as a mentor and a father figure to Romeo. The other rival family are the Capulets, headed by Lord Capulet, who is married to Lady Capulet, and both hate the Montagues with a fierce passion. They have a 13-year-old daughter called Juliet, who is naive and dutiful until she falls in love with Romeo and is forced to grow up quickly. Juliet has a cousin called Tybalt, who loves violence, confrontation, and absolutely hates peace, almost as much as he hates the Montagues. Also on the Capulet side is the nurse, a mother figure to Juliet, who also brought her up since she was a baby. They have a very close bond, even closer than Juliet has with her actual mother. We also have Paris, a young rich count from a prominent family who wants to marry Juliet and who seeks permission from Lord Capulet in the early stages of the play. The prince is the ruler of Verona and is concerned with maintaining peace within the city. In the prologue, we're told about the violent feud between the two families that's been raging on for so long that nobody can really remember how it started. We also learn how Romeo and Juliet are star-crossed lovers, fall in love and ultimately die as a result of this feud, which finally brings it to an end. In Act 1, a fight breaks out on the streets of Verona between servants of the Capulet and the Montague families. The prince arrives and stops the fighting, declaring that anybody who disturbs the peace from this moment on would pay for it with their lives. Meanwhile, away from the fighting, Romeo is upset about the fact that the girl he loves, Rosaline, doesn't love him back. He tells Benvolio, who in return tells him not to worry and that there are other beautiful girls out there. Romeo doesn't believe him, thinking that Rosaline is the most beautiful girl in the entire world. Elsewhere, Paris asks Lord Capulet for permission to marry Juliet. Capulet is unsure and encourages Paris to wait a couple of years until she's older. Paris insists, and Capulet says he should attend the masquerade ball they were throwing that very night to try and impress Juliet. Mercutio receives an invitation to the Capulet ball, whilst Romeo and Benvolio gatecrash after tricking an illiterate Capulet servant who didn't realise they were actually Montagues. At the ball, Romeo hopes to run into Rosaline, who had also been invited, but instead, he meets Juliet. They talk and flirt and kiss, all without realising that they were each from rival families that hated each other, though it doesn't take long for them to discover this. In Act 2, Romeo abandons Mercutio and Benvolio to go back and find Juliet. He sneaks into the Capulet's garden and finds her at a window, thinking aloud about her feelings towards Romeo. She likes him, despite their family's feud. Romeo overhears this and goes to her. They talk and laugh and kiss, and then decide to get married the very next day. The following day, Romeo goes to see Friar Lawrence and tells him about Juliet. The friar comments on how fickle young love is, with Romeo having been obsessed with Rosaline only a day earlier. Romeo dismisses this and asks the friar to marry him and Juliet that day. Thinking such a marriage may bring an end to the age-old feud between the Capulets and Montagues, the friar agrees. Romeo spends some time with Benvolio and Mercutio before the nurse arrives, wishing to speak to Romeo in private. Whilst the other two poke fun at her from a distance, the nurse tells Romeo that the wedding has been organised for that very afternoon. The two young lovers get married in a secret ceremony, without either of their families knowing. In Act 3, Mercutio and Benvolio wander the streets of Verona. Benvolio is worried that, due to the heat, a brawl with the Montagues may be inescapable if they cross paths. Tybalt arrives and requests to speak to them, but Mercutio taunts him. Romeo arrives and Tybalt insults him, calling him a villain. Romeo, who is now married to Juliet and therefore is family to Tybalt, refuses to be drawn into a fight with him, much to Tybalt's annoyance and Mercutio's confusion. Mercutio declares that if Romeo will not fight Tybalt, then he will. The two fight, and Romeo, desperately trying to bring about peace, puts himself in between them. Tybalt then stabs Mercutio under Romeo's arm, fatally wounding him. Tybalt and his men flee the scene, whilst Mercutio lies dying on the ground. As he dies, Mercutio curses both the Montagues and the Capulets. Romeo is enraged, feeling that his love for Juliet has made him less masculine, and that he should have fought Tybalt instead of Mercutio. Tybalt returns to the scene, and, this time, Romeo fights him. He kills Tybalt in revenge, and is banished from Verona by the prince as a result. At the Capulet household, the nurse tells Juliet what has happened. After some initial confusion, Juliet is devastated that Romeo had been banished, even more so than for the death of her cousin. Romeo speaks to the friar, who tells him he is lucky to be banished and not executed. When the nurse appears, Romeo is overcome with emotion, and the friar tells him to stop being unmanly. The friar comes up with a plan for Romeo to spend the night with Juliet before fleeing Verona to Mantua until word of their marriage can be spread and the possibility of his return presents itself. Meanwhile, Capulet and Paris agree, in light of recent tragic events, to bring his marriage to Juliet forward. After spending the night with Juliet, Romeo reluctantly leaves her. Lady Capulet tells Juliet about the recent developments with Paris, and Juliet is appalled. She rejects the idea of marrying Paris, and a large row takes place between her and her father, who threatens to disown her if she doesn't marry Paris. The nurse tells Juliet it'd be best for her to marry Paris. Juliet is disgusted at her disloyalty and lies to her, saying she's going to Friar Lawrence for confession. In reality, she goes to the friar for help, and acknowledges that if he can't, then she has the power to take her own life. In Act 4, Juliet speaks to the friar, telling him that she'd rather kill herself than marry Paris. The friar comes up with another plan. Juliet will agree to marry Paris, but then, on the night before the wedding, she'll drink a sleeping potion that will make her appear dead. She'll then be taken to the Capulet tomb, and Romeo, who the friar will write to and explain the plan, will be there when she wakes up, and the two will return to Mantua to live out their lives away from their parents' feud. Juliet agrees without hesitation, and the friar gives her the potion. After Juliet agrees to marry Paris, Capulet is so thrilled he decides to move the wedding forward another day, to tomorrow. Juliet, after some hesitation, drinks the potion. On the morning of the wedding, the nurse finds Juliet seemingly dead. Capulet, Lady Capulet, Paris and the nurse are all devastated. The friar urges them to make preparations for Juliet's funeral. In Act 5, the final act of the play, we begin in Mantua, where Romeo doesn't receive the friar's letter explaining the plan, but instead, he's greeted by Balthazar, Romeo's servant, who saw Juliet's funeral and believed it to be real. Balthazar tells Romeo that Juliet is dead, and Romeo breaks down. He vows to go to Juliet's tomb and kill himself so that he can be with her. He goes to an apothecary, somebody who sells drugs, and buys a vial of poison, and then travels to Verona. Paris is grieving the death of Juliet at her grave. He sees Romeo enter and enters a rage, believing that he is to blame indirectly for Juliet's death after he murdered Tybalt, and it's the grief of Tybalt's death that is supposedly what caused Juliet's. Paris confronts Romeo, who pleads with him to leave. Paris refuses, and the two duel. Romeo kills Paris, whose dying wish is to be laid near Juliet in the tomb. Romeo agrees to this. Romeo enters the tomb and finds Juliet. He speaks to her, explaining his intention of spending eternity with her. He drinks the poison and dies. Moments later, Friar Lawrence arrives at the tomb where he finds Paris's body and then Romeo's. As he processes what has happened, Juliet awakens. She asks him where Romeo is. The friar thinks he can hear the guards approaching and quickly tells Juliet that Paris and Romeo are both dead and that she had to leave with him immediately. Juliet refuses, and the friar leaves without her. Juliet sees Romeo's body near her and, hearing the guards nearby, stabs herself with Romeo's dagger. Everyone arrives at the tomb, except Lady Montague, Romeo's mother, who has since died of grief over Romeo's exile. The friar, upon the prince's request, tells of Romeo and Juliet's secret marriage. The prince blames their deaths on the feud between the Capulets and Montagues. Lord Capulet and Lord Montague agree to end the feud, with Montague saying he'll build a golden statue of Juliet, and Capulet saying he'll build one of Romeo to stand beside hers. So there you have it, the plot of Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet. If you have any questions about anything I've discussed in this video, feel free to leave a comment below and I'll get back to you as soon as I can. If you found this video useful, why not consider subscribing to the channel so that you don't miss any future videos from me. Thank you for watching, bye for now.